Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked on Wolves. Today on the show, Karl-Anthony Towns is almost ready to be back on the floor. He's questionable for Wednesday night's game against the Hawks. Let's talk a little bit about what the Wolves' rotation could look like, pairings that might make sense for Karl-Anthony Towns to get him back on the floor, back into the swing of things. We'll also preview the matchup Wolves-Hawks. We'll look at the Western Conference standings. It's all upcoming on the show. Welcome in. You are Locked on Wolves.
You are Locked on Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to you by Ultimate Basketball GM. Ever dreamed of being an NBA GM and managing your basketball franchise? Then this game is definitely for you. To download the game, just visit ultimatebasketballgm.com or look it up on the app stores. Our listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using the promo code Locked On in the game. Happy Wednesday, everybody. Happy Hump Day and happy Timberwolves game day. And happy Karl-Anthony Towns being upgraded to questionable on the injury report. We'll talk more about that. I actually want to spend most of the show today talking about potential rotation options with Towns, how he might be reintegrated, what Chris Finch might have up his sleeve. And we'll preview Wolves Hawks here in just a minute as well. First of all, though, a big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Also, Locked On Wolves, along with all of our other Minnesota Locked On podcasts, are available on Roku and Amazon Fire TV on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app. More great local sports coverage 24/7, and it's free. Download the Locked On Sports Minnesota app today on Roku and Amazon Fire TV. You can also follow the show on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves, and also on my account, which is at Beecken with two B's, two E's, CKEN. Okay. So the big news, of course, from Tuesday is that both Karl-Anthony Towns and Anthony Edwards are listed as questionable for Wednesday night's game back at home at Target Center against the Atlanta Hawks. Of course, Edwards was questionable Saturday, less than 24 hours after what appeared to be severely spraining his ankle on Friday night in Chicago. He was questionable Saturday, questionable Monday, did not play. Karl-Anthony Towns has not been listed as anything other than out since late November, when he initially hurt the calf. So, of course, there's been a lot of momentum in recent days in the last couple of weeks towards Towns playing. He's been doing on-court one-on-one with, he started about 2 weeks ago doing on-court one-on-one with team personnel. Then he started doing 2-on-0. Then he started doing full contact practice. And then he's been doing the I guess now famous stay in shape game after practice with non-rotation players, guys coming back from injury. We saw that as the last step for Jalen Noel a few days ago. And, others who have been trying to get back into game action. So, I mean, Towns is like, I predicted on Monday that he wouldn't play until Sunday because after Wednesday night's game, the Wolves don't play Thursday, Friday, Saturday. They don't play again until Sunday. So I thought they'd give him another few days. But the flip side of that is, of course, what the Wolves might be thinking is like, we get him he can play and then he gets 3 days off, right? You could look at it either way. No matter how you look at it, those 3 off days are a blessing for whatever they decide to do. The other possibility is Towns plays and maybe Edwards doesn't, because Towns is in theory fully recovered from an injury. Edwards, a sprained ankle, it just happened a few days ago. Give him a few more days to make sure he's all the way back. So maybe Towns comes back and Ant doesn't on Wednesday, which would be an interesting dynamic because we haven't seen that like hardly ever, and certainly not this year. I think maybe around the All-Star break last year, I think Ant missed a game with the ankle or the knee or something, and Towns probably played, but we haven't seen Cat with no Ant really at all. So that's a possibility. They're both listed as questionable. And the Wolves, of course, beat the Hawks a couple of weeks ago now. I think it was just last Monday with Ant and with no Cat. We'll talk more about the Hawks matchup here in a little bit. But it's been a few weeks. I mean, probably since about the All-Star break when I thought we were getting closer to Cat coming back. I spent a little bit of time back then about like, hey, what could the lineup look like? Who loses minutes, etc. I kind of want to do that same thing again now. Similar, a little bit of a different angle, because we now know if he's not back Wednesday, he should be back Sunday against the Warriors, right? I think that's at this point fair to say. So let's talk about it this way. I think this is just my prediction. I think Towns will probably come off the bench, and here's why. Well, minutes limit, first of all. Second of all, Chris Finch said he would be open to that a couple of weeks ago when he was asked, said that was something they were considering. I think he even used those words. And also the Timberwolves starting. I mean, think about this. Kyle Anderson has been in the starting lineup now since November. I think he started every game since Karl-Anthony Towns got hurt. And if you look at Kyle Anderson's numbers, there's a lot of starting. Like, it makes sense that guys' 2-man numbers are going to play better with starters because in theory your starters are your best players, but it doesn't always work out that way. Kyle Anderson's 2-man lineup numbers are really interesting to me. His best 2-man pairings are Jordan McLaughlin and Taurean Prince. He's a plus. His net rating is an 11.2 with McLaughlin and a 10.4 with Taurean Prince. But his worst ones are also with bench players. His worst two, if you take out Wendell Moore, Josh Minott, Matt Ryan, because they're not rotation players, his worst two are Naz Reid, a minus 5.7, and Nickeil Alexander-Walker, a minus 9.5. Now, that's obviously very limited, only 123 minutes with Alexander-Walker because he just was acquired. And actually, his third worst is Austin Rivers, and they've actually played 356 minutes together. They're a minus 5. So Anderson had his 2 best are bench players, his 3 worst are bench players, and all the starters are in the middle. Anderson and Gobert are his 3rd best, then Anderson and McDaniels. Anderson and Edwards are only a plus 2.8. Anderson and Towns are a plus 2.2. And then Conley, I guess, is also kind of in there in the middle. The only bench player that has kind of a middle of the pack net rating with Kyle Anderson is Jaylen Noel. And of course, they played a ton of minutes together as well. So I think there's something to be said for keeping Kyle Anderson with the starting lineup for a short period of time, especially if you're worried about, I mean, Towns is going to play less minutes than Anderson anyway, I would imagine. I mean, the Wolves have not come out and said that Towns will have a minutes limit, but it makes a lot of sense to limit him to, 20, 24, 26 minutes or whatever, at least to start. I don't believe that the Wolves have any, I think there's maybe one back-to-back. I think like the last couple games of the season are the only back-to-back because you're looking at potentially a built-in rest day there. I take that back. Sunday, Monday this week is a back-to-back. So the Wolves have 2 back-to-backs left. Sunday, Monday of this week, which is a weird one. And then the last weekend of the season, Saturday, Sunday, April 8th and 9th. So, I mean, you might look at a situation where Towns comes off the bench because he's going to have a minutes limit. You might not play him back-to-back anyway. So perhaps he plays Wednesday against Atlanta, Sunday against Golden State. You give him Monday. He misses Monday against Sacramento. He gets Tuesday off. He comes back and plays Wednesday against Phoenix. So, you don't want to disrupt the starting lineup if you don't have to either. So perhaps that's the move is, for a variety of reasons, you bring him off the bench. You look at Towns' 2-man numbers. That's also pretty interesting. And we've talked about this extensively before. Actually, it was a big offseason topic is how good Towns and Jordan McLaughlin have been together. The two of them are a great pairing. It's not quite. Remember last year, the Wolves' best 2-man pairing was actually Towns and Jaylen Noel, weirdly enough. But Towns and McLaughlin is also really good. And also, by the way, Towns and Noel, despite Noel's issues, are Towns' second best 2-man. So Towns' best 2-man pairings are Jordan McLaughlin, a 21.3. And yes, I know all of Towns' stuff is small sample at this point. But, I mean, go back to last year, it wasn't all that far off. Towns has a 21.3 with Jordan McLaughlin. He's got a 9.3 with Jaylen Noel. Now, a couple things to point out here. Both those players are really good in pick and roll and specifically pick and pop. Jordan McLaughlin is really good at throwing the pass back to a big popping, which is one of the reasons why that pairing is so good. The other thing is those defensive ratings are fantastic. Like Towns actually has a better offensive rating with Kyle Anderson. He's got a better offensive rating. Well, actually, that's the best example. But the defensive rating with Towns and McLaughlin is a 96.7. The defensive rating with Noel is a 102.2. Now, McLaughlin's a decent defender. Noel's not. Towns is, I would say, is also a decent defender. He's not great. Why is that? Well, very likely with McLaughlin and Noel on the floor, Towns was probably playing center. He wasn't playing power forward in those minutes. And it'd be hard to go back and like pinpoint that, I guess, without digging a bit further into 5-man lineups and things like that. But very likely he was playing the 5 in those minutes. The 5 is better for Towns defensively. And the Wolves also have adjusted their coverages, going all the way back to October, November. They weren't strictly playing drop when Rudy was on the bench, right? I mean, Towns struggled in drop for years, and they made the switch last year to a high wall pick and roll coverage, a blitzing coverage on the perimeter so that Towns wasn't dropping. The Wolves primarily drop now with Rudy Gobert, although actually, ironically, ironically, against Atlanta on Wednesday. The Wolves probably won't be playing very much drop against Atlanta's backcourt. They'll likely be switching everything. But all that to say, Towns is better defensively as a 5, but he's dynamic offensively at either spot. So something to think about, again, with him coming off the bench. Now, if he's coming off the bench, whose minutes is he taking? Naz Reid, right? I want to talk a little bit more about that. Who else might be at risk of losing minutes with Towns coming back? So we're going to do all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at Ultimate Pro Basketball GM. I'm really geeked out by our new partner and sponsor of the episode today, the mobile game Ultimate Pro Basketball GM. Ever dreamed of becoming an NBA GM and managing your basketball franchise? Well, your dream can come true, and this game is definitely for you. Manage every strategic aspect of your team, play through the season, and lead your team to glory. You're responsible for hiring the right coaches and assistants, trading and training players, making draft picks, navigating your franchise through free agency, plus the draft and all the ups and downs of a season. All this in a challenging and realistic game world. Ultimate Pro Basketball GM is completely free and playable offline. Play on the go as you want and when you want to. There's a Locked On League going on right now. It's super competitive, as you might expect. Locked On hosts are competitive enough, or I should say defensive enough, maybe? That sounds like a bad word. About their own teams that they cover. Just imagine an Ultimate Pro Basketball GM league with kind of that same banter. Locked On Wolves listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using the promo Locked On in the game store. So make sure to check it out. To download the game, just visit probasketballgm.com. If you're watching on YouTube, you can scan the code on your screen now or look it up in the app stores. Again, that's probasketballgm.com. Ultimate Basketball GM. Start your dynasty today. All right, we talked a little bit about the Towns McLaughlin pairing. We talked about the Towns Noel pairing. I mean, again, and also Kyle Anderson, his relative struggles with some of the bench players. So perhaps we're looking at Anderson sticking in the starting lineup at the 4 next to Rudy Gobert. And by the way, Gobert's not on the injury report for Wednesday, which he'd had the sprained ankle that I think he missed one game for it, and had obviously hobbled him for the last really, I think, 2 weeks now. So you're looking at Anderson and Gobert in the starting lineup. You're potentially looking at Towns coming off the bench with Jordan McLaughlin, with Jaylen Noel, who's now healthy and played pretty well for the majority of the game on Wednesday against the Knicks. Or not Wednesday, whatever day that was, Monday against the Knicks. I mean, if Towns comes off the bench, he's taking minutes from Naz Reid, right? There's no other two ways about it. Now, Naz is still going to play because you still need a backup 4. You'd rather play big with Naz at the 4 and Towns at the 5 than you would with, say, Jaden McDaniels playing heavy minutes at the 4. I mean, that's likely what we're looking at rotation-wise. I mean, you don't really have any other than Taurean Prince playing some 4, which he's done. I mean, that's kind of what we're looking at. So you're looking at Naz losing some minutes, and it's not ideal because he's played so well, but I also think that sometimes perception is greater than reality. Like, Naz has been really good this year, but if you could replace Naz minutes with Karl-Anthony Towns minutes, you do it. And Rudy Gobert's also been better than Naz. Now, you could argue Naz is still one of the team's, call it like 8 or 9 best players. Like, you could make that argument with a straight face, certainly. And so that's part of the reason the Wolves, some of their best talent is tied up in that 4-5 position, right? So Chris Finch is going to have to be creative with how he does this. And we've seen a little bit of a glimpse since Naz has primarily played the 5 off the bench lately, and Gobert's primarily played the 5 in the starting lineup. We've been able to kind of contrast offensively, well, actually both ends of the floor, but especially offensively, how the Wolves play differently with each of those guys. Naz is obviously a threat to pop and to roll. Gobert is one of the best rollers in the league. He's great at diving to the rim and pick and roll, but he never pops. Towns usually pops. If you go back and look at the numbers, I don't have them in front of me, but I think it was like 3/4 of the time or 80% of the time, going back to last year and the first part of this year, Towns pops and pick and roll. Gobert rolls 97% of the time or whatever. And Naz prefers to pop as well, but can roll. So he's the one that's maybe the best blend of the two. But the threat of Naz shooting a 3 is not the same as the threat of Karl-Anthony Towns shooting a 3. Naz is shooting, 30, 33% from three. And it feels like it should be a little higher than that, but it's just 33%. Now, I know that Towns this year was 32% before he got hurt, but he's a career 40% three-point shooter. So teams are going to be, they're petrified of Towns popping out of pick and roll game. And they're not as worried about Nas doing it. So think about subbing Towns for Nas and how much more dynamic it makes pick and roll with Jordan McLaughlin. Now, we also know Nas and J-Mac have a great chemistry. And that's the other thing is like, can you get away with like Nas and Towns minutes together have not been great historically. This season, they only played 48 minutes together earlier this year because, again, Towns and Gobert were playing so many minutes together. They were a minus 20.7. Nas and Towns playing together. Last year, Nas and Towns playing together were a minus 10.3 in 84 minutes. So, and I know that this is something Ryan Saunders wanted to try when he flipped from trying to play small to playing big. And then Chris Finch did it a little bit right when he took over a couple of years ago, mid-season. It just has not worked, Towns and Reed together. Now, Nas is a better player than he was 2 years ago. There's no question. So perhaps they try it. But I just don't know what this big rotation looks like. Again, it's probably Anderson at the 4, Gobert at the 5 to start. Towns is your primary backup at the 5. And there's some sort of like substitution pattern there where maybe Nas and Gobert play their minutes together. And at some point, Anderson and Towns are on the floor together when you're giving maybe Gobert that second half breather. But I still think it's Anderson at the starting lineup, Towns with the bench unit to start at least, maybe for the first week or something, or however long Towns is on a minutes restriction. The trick, though, is how do you keep Nas as part of the rotation while reintegrating Karl-Anthony Towns? When Frank, if we're being really honest, you'd rather have Nas on the floor than in a vacuum, regardless of position. If you're talking who are the best 7 or 8 players on the team, well, you'd rather have Nas on the floor than probably Alexander Walker, right? You'd rather have him on the floor than, I don't know, probably Taurean Prince. I guess maybe that's not true. It's probably close there if we're talking in a vacuum best players on the team. But there's so much to consider. And we all know the Wolves were a 500 team before Towns got hurt through 21 games. I think they were 10 and 11 if you include the game in which Towns got hurt. And the goal now is to I guess to do better than they did at the start of the season on the fly with so many of these guys now with 60 plus games, 70 games, almost 70 games now, or we're at 70 games, 71 games where they've been playing together without Towns for the last 50 of them. So how does this reintegration happen? Does Nas still get his minutes? Does Towns come off the bench? I think the answer to all those things is yes. But Chris Finch is going to have to push the right buttons and pull the right levers. And I think he's primarily done that rotation-wise. There's also the Jalen Noel thing, right? We saw him play the other night. I was going to pull up the box score again just to refresh myself how many minutes he played. But Noel played pretty heavy minutes off the bench in his return from missing a month. And he was really good in the first half, not so much in the second half. So the first casualty to the rotation is Austin Rivers, right? He's been in and out of the lineup with the injury anyway, with the back spasms. So I'd be surprised if Rivers sees much in the way of minutes. If Towns and Edwards both come back, who else loses minutes? We probably see less Jalen Noel. We might see less Nickeil Alexander-Walker. It's probably on some level matchup dependent. But again, Nas Reed could also remember early this season, Nas actually had a couple DNP CDs. He didn't even see the floor in a couple of games before Towns got hurt because he really becomes, he's a third center. Frankly, he's a fourth big if you consider Kyle Anderson a big, and Kyle Anderson hasn't really played much 3 this year. Kyle Anderson's a 4 that has played almost as much 5 as he has 3 this season for the Wolves. So Chris Finch has a lot he's got to try and figure out here. A lot he's got to parse. But on Wednesday, it wouldn't surprise me if we saw Towns and not Edwards again. I think that's my prediction based on nothing but the schedule and kind of, the nature of where both these guys are in their injury recoveries respectively. That's my prediction for Wednesday. All right. I want to preview Wolves Hawks. We'll talk a little about Wolves Hawks from last week, what Atlanta did the other night against Detroit. And by the other night, I mean last night. They're on the second night of a back-to-back. We'll talk about all that here in just a moment. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at FanDuel. The tournament, you know what tournament I'm talking about. College basketball is heating up, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. You can bet on everything from the money line to point scores and threes drained. You can look at Wolves Hawks. I'm guessing the Wolves are favored. It's probably in flux. I haven't looked, but I'm guessing it's in flux because of the injury report. But they should be favored by, I don't know, 4.5, 5 points at home against Atlanta. Atlanta traveling the second night of a back-to-back. But go check that out at FanDuel. FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with the same game parlay. Don't miss the chance to get your no sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, Wolves Hawks on Wednesday. The Wolves just saw the Hawks, I think it was last Monday, so 9 days ago. Since then, Atlanta has been what they've been doing for. I saw some stat the other day that Atlanta's been within a game of 500, like at 500, a game better, a game worse for like 2 months or something just incredibly insane because they've never won or lost more than 2 games in a row. And actually, if you go back the last month, this is really weird. Like they've literally gone 2 losses, 2 wins, 2 losses, 2 wins, 2 losses, 2 wins, then 1 loss, 1 win, 2 losses, 2 wins, 2 losses, 1 win, 1 loss, 1 win. So they played the Wolves, they're 2-1. They beat the Warriors at home. They lost at San Antonio, and then they beat the Pistons at home. That's the Hawks season, right? They fired their coach about a month ago. They've just been a very mediocre team that's been disappointing. Not too dissimilar from the Wolves in that sense. The Wolves have been a little bit more roller coastery, getting 2-3 games above and 2-3 games below and 500, that is. So anyway, the Wolves beat the Hawks a week ago Monday, 136-115. Since then, the Hawks, again, beat the Warriors and Pistons, lost the Spurs. But they played Tuesday night at home in Atlanta against Detroit, and then flew all the way up from Atlanta to take on the Wolves Wednesday night. So that, of course, favors the Wolves. The travel and rest advantage goes to Minnesota. From the last game, real quickly, when these teams played, Naz Reid did not play in that game. So Rudy Gobert was your starting center, and Luka Garza played the bench minutes. And they both played really well. We'll talk in a minute about keys to this game, but one of them is rebounded against the Atlanta Hawks. And the Wolves were a minus 14 on the glass, but they shot the ball well enough offensively that it didn't really matter. Minnesota shot 59% from the field and 43% from 3 against Atlanta. They held the Hawks to 18% shooting on 3-point attempts in that game. Ants had 32, 8, and 5, of course, in his return to his hometown of Atlanta, 12 of 25 shooting. He was only 2 of 10 outside the arc. So Ant was 10 of 15 on 2-point attempts, 6 of 10 at the free throw line. They got a triple-double from Kyle Anderson in his recent string of triple-doubles. Kyle had 14, 12 assists, and 10 rebounds, shot 5 of 6 in that game, had a couple of steals and a couple of blocks. Rudy had 14 and 8, plus 4 assists and 3 blocks. A well-rounded game. Conley had 21. Garza had 21 off the bench. Garza had 14 off the bench. But the Wolves jumped all over the Hawks early. They were up 11 after the first quarter. They were up 24 at halftime and didn't really let up in the second half, ended up winning by 21. So a really, really good game last time around. The key to what they did and what they'll need to do again on Wednesday is don't let anybody but Trae Young beat you. Like Trae Young got his 41, high volume. He got to the line 10 times. He shot the ball 25 times. He turned it over 4 times, but like nobody else did anything. Nobody else on the Hawks scored more than 16, and that was Onyeka Okongwu off the bench, who had 9 offensive rebounds and had 16 and 14 off the bench. Okongwu did. DeAndre Hunter had 15, took him 17 shots to get there. Capella only had 10 points. Deontay Murray only had 11 points in this game. DeAndre Hunter had 15. I said that already. 15, took him 17 shots, 1 of 5 outside the arc. You go down the line, nobody made more than 1 3 on the Atlanta Hawks. They were 4 of 22, 18.2% from 3-point range. The Wolves did such a good job of defending the 3-point line. And the Hawks, by the way, are last in 3-point rate, which might surprise you because they have, everybody thinks of Trae Young as like this high volume 3-point shooter, and he is. But you take out a couple of their top high volume guys, and like nobody else shoots threes on this team. So they're last in 3-point rate. They're 20th in 3-point percentage. So what the Wolves did isn't, 18, 19% is an extreme case, but what the Wolves did last time against the Hawks in terms of 3-point defense, that's entirely, you could replicate that. You can definitely do what you did last time against Atlanta. The thing the Wolves need to do better is defend the glass. Atlanta's 13th in offensive rebound rate, and they don't turn the ball over, right? So they get shots up and they get offensive rebounds and they try and score on second chance points. It's been an issue for the Wolves all season. The only reason it wasn't a glaring issue in the Hawks game is because the Wolves shot the lights out themselves. But if you have a shooting night like you did, say, the other night against, what was that, the Boston game? Man, what was the other game where like nobody could make a basket? Was it last Friday night's game? It was a game recently where the Wolves, neither team could make a shot. And they're all running together in my head now. But if that happens again, the Hawks have an advantage because they're a much better offensive rebounding team. The Wolves are like 24th or 25th at offensive rebound rate. The Hawks are 13th. The Hawks are also a better defensive rebounding team too. And they get to the free throw line. They don't get to the free throw line that often, but they defend without fouling for the most part. And in some ways, they're the inverse of the Wolves in that they've been a top 10 offense for most of the season. The Wolves have flirted with being a top 10 defense all season. The Hawks have been a bottom 10 offense, or excuse me, Hawks have been a bottom 10 defense. The Wolves have been a bottom 10 offense. Now, the difference is, of course, the Wolves were expected to have a really dynamic offense, and they haven't. The Hawks, I don't think anyone expected them to be a great defensive team, but they've been disappointing in a lot of ways. So if the Wolves compete like they did against Atlanta a week and a half ago, if they shoot the ball similar to how they did, they just got to rebound better. Defensively, the Wolves switched everything. Remember, there were a couple of instances the Wolves put in Josh Minott and just went like I don't know, I'm just going to call it the pterodactyl lineup. I mean, you put out Jaden McDaniels and Josh Minott and Kyle Anderson. And I guess, I mean, even Mike Conley's got a pretty big wingspan, but I'm trying to, Torian Prince, like you put out just guys with length, and to have Minott, McDaniels, and Anderson on the floor all at once, that's a nightmare for a defense because, and Edwards, obviously Edwards was on the floor in that instance too. Those are all guys with just incredible wingspans and generally good defensive basketball IQs. On-ball defense in terms of Ant's on-ball defense. You have Minott jumping passing lanes, McDaniels on-ball defense, Anderson doing everything he does defensively, rebounding the basketball as well. It's one of the few games where Chris Finch has gone like actual offense-defense subs throughout the game. He did it in end-of-quarter situations at the end of the first quarter, tried to do it at the end of the third with Minott. Look for that again. I think that's a way that you can steal some minutes. Also, to give Karl-Anthony Towns a rest if he does play. If Edwards plays, same thing. Like, get some of these fresh, younger guys with length. Maybe even Wendell Moore if he's with the team. Get these guys in the game at these end-of-quarter situations. Get them jumping passing lanes, contesting shots, switching everything, and just giving Trae Young different looks. And just make his life difficult. Like, he's going to get his 30 or 35, or against the Wolves last time, 40. Against the Pistons just on Tuesday night, Trae Young had 30. He was only 7 of 19, but he got to the line 15 times. That's going to happen. And the Wolves foul a ton. Just don't get into crazy foul trouble. Switch everything. Don't let anybody else hurt you. Hawks Pistons on Tuesday. Bogdan Bogdanovic had 18 points on just 11 shots. John Collins had a pretty good game as well. But there just aren't that many other ancillary pieces that are going to kill you on the Hawks. You just got to make sure nobody goes off against you. Good, defend the 3-point line, defensive rebound, don't get into crazy foul trouble, and you should be fine. All right, we will. I'm planning to do the live postcast. Marnie's actually off on Wednesday night, so she will not be doing the postcast with me on Locked On Sports Minnesota YouTube about 45 minutes after the game. I'm planning to go live myself, and it'll probably be pretty much right after the game, maybe 10, 15 minutes after the final horn, so a little earlier than typical. Marnie will be back. The plan is for her to be back Sunday for the postcast after the Wolves-Warriors game. So we'll do that postcast, and again, after we do the live show on YouTube, the audio goes up on the Locked On Wolves audio feed, wherever you listen to podcasts. You can find that after the fact as well. A big thank you for listening today and for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere, including YouTube. A quick reminder that you could also listen on all your favorite audio platforms: Apple, Google, Spotify, Odyssey, wherever you listen to podcasts, you can find the show. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. You can follow on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, C-K-E-N. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, The Locked On Network is your local experts on the biggest stories. Now make your second listen today, Game to Game NBA podcast, every moment, every top performance, and every result. Locked On Game to Game covers every game from across the NBA with local analysis that only Locked On can deliver. Follow Game to Game on Locked On NBA, available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.